This is
She had three other.
this is a very rare occurrence.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this work session of the Leawood Planning Commission. I'll note for the record that we have a number of commissioners who are participating by Zoom, and as well, the YouTube channel for the City of Leawood is open and available to the public. So with that, I would note that because this is a work session, while the public is absolutely welcome to watch the discussion and deliberations, there will not be an opportunity for public comment on the issues that we're going to address tonight. But again, we welcome anyone who's participating by YouTube. With that, we'll call the session to order and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Good evening. Commissioner Carbert,
Here.
Commissioner McGurran,
Here.
Commissioner Belzer,
Here.
Commissioner Hoyt,
Absent.
Commissioner Coleman. Here. Commissioner Block. Here. Commissioner Stevens,
Here.
Commissioner Guyed,
Here.
Chair Elkins.
Present. I find that we have a quorum present and we can proceed on to the discussion this evening. Typically, as we have a work session, especially when we're considering the capital improvement plan, we take the opportunity to note for the record who all from the city is present and participating this evening. So, Mark, if you want to introduce your staff or have your staff, and including those beyond your staff who are participating, introduce themselves, we'd be grateful.
Yes.
We have some new faces, so.
Actually, we have the city administrator, Diane Stoddard, David Lay, Public Works Director, Chris Claxton, the Parks Director, and Loretta Morgan is Finance.
And I think our city clerk is here as well this evening.
He is.
Welcome, Stephen. Glad to have you, and welcome, Diane. It's good to have you here. Welcome back, David. You used to spend all your time with us. And Chris, of course, it's good to have you as well. So, and we have somebody from the fire department, and I apologize. Welcome, Chief Fitzgerald. We appreciate your being here tonight. So with that, I believe that the primary, well, there are two different matters on the agenda tonight, but my guess is that, Mark, you want to proceed with the capital improvement program, and then we'll talk about roofs after that.
Correct.
Okay.
We'd like to open with, the 2024-2028.
Please proceed.
What we're doing tonight is a work session on the 2024-2028 capital improvement program. This currently is a work session, and then we'll have the final recommendation at the time of the next Planning Commission meeting, which is May 23rd. We just kind of want to go over a little bit as far as, the role of the Planning Commission in this process. And so the role of the Planning Commission is really to look at the projects within the capital improvement program and then to determine if they're in conformance with the comprehensive plan. So the individual projects, as far as funding that, are actually done more at the governing body level, but it is the Planning Commission's role to actually take a look at this and see if it actually fits within the comprehensive plan. If anybody has any questions, I can answer those, or I can turn it over to Diane, and she can talk a little bit more.
Mark, I guess as a starting point, I appreciate the comments in the memo that you sent out and emphasizing what statutorily is our responsibility and our accountability when it comes to the capital improvement program. A couple of thoughts. One, I was wondering, and again, there's no rush on this, just maybe before the 23rd, if you could provide, or Marcy could provide us with the citation for what the statute actually tells us with respect to the review of the CIP. But more to the point, that's mainly the interest of an old lawyer more than anything else. But beyond that, I've struggled over the course of the last few days as I've looked at this and thought about what our obligation is, as to what tools are available to us to really determine what the standard is. The standard is compliance with the plan, but it's hard to draw a picture in my mind from all the various projects that we have on here to the comprehensive plan. And so while it's a fairly easy standard to articulate as to what the standard is, trying to actually assure ourselves that we're discharging our statutory duties by comparing these projects against the comprehensive plan is challenging. And again, I don't want to derail the issues. We want to go ahead and go forward tonight, but if staff could at least give some thought when we get to actually the place where we make a recommendation to the governing body about what it is that we can look at to be comfortable. Again, we have absolute confidence in the staff, and you tell us that it's consistent with the plan. That's evidence in and of itself. But if there's something else that's more objective, that would be helpful as well. And it's one of these things where I always scold people for not opposing if they don't have a propose. And I've got to tell you right now, I don't necessarily know of a propose. So I'm sorry to toss that back at you, but.
No, and that's fine. And actually, if you go through the different projects, you'll see a lot of them are done as far as maintenance, as far as maintaining what the city has with regard to the streets. You'll also notice that there's a couple of projects in there with Fire Station number 1 and then Fire Station number 4. So ensuring that the city has the applicable facilities to meet its needs with regard to fire and police. In addition, you'll notice in there that you approved a plan for 135 mixed-use development that's located at the southwest corner of 135th Street and Kenneth Road. And so there's a project in there related to, as far as the construction of High Drive, that kind of goes in between the eastern and western side of that being constructed. And I believe there's another project in there as well, and I believe it's also associated with the 135 project, as far as the developer is asking for a benefit district or some funding with regard to that. So those are just some of the examples of some of the projects that are located in here that the city is, wanting to meet that need, which is kind of what the comprehensive plan shows is the goal of the comprehensive plan. And I can definitely get more for the.
Yeah, give it some thought. And one other, just to set the context here, am I correct in believing that I'm reading off the right page when I'm looking at the 2019 comprehensive plan? Or is there one since
Yeah,
then?
that's what we talked about before. And so we did talk about the comprehensive plan this last year. However, there were some numbers that we were still waiting for, and we're hoping to have that before too long.
And those were the numbers from the Census Bureau, right?
Correct.
That were delayed in part because of the pandemic and just
Correct.
getting re-going again. But 2019 is what we're working off of right now.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And sorry to interrupt. Please proceed. Welcome, Ms. Stoddard. If you could introduce yourself for our record, we'd be grateful.
Good evening, Chairman Elkins and Planning Commissioners. I'm Diane Stoddard, City Administrator, and it's my pleasure to be here in front of you this evening to present the 2024-2028 Capital Improvements Program. And I'd like to thank all the staff members that were involved in putting this together, those that are present in the audience. And so I'll go through this at a high level and then be happy to entertain your questions this evening, and the staff members are here as well that can help with that. In the event that we can't answer a question for you this evening, we'll loop back as you'll have this on your agenda again on the 23rd as we understand. I will add that as we were talking about the statutory obligations related to the Planning Commission's action, one of the comments that one of the staff members made is that quite likely the statute is written for cities that are in high growth mode, where they're talking about annexations and planning into unincorporated areas of the county. And so when you think about it that way, it's probably a lot more applicable to carefully looking at how the conformance with the comprehensive plan aligns with these capital projects. But I think, as Mark stated it very well, for the most part, these projects are having to do with maintaining the city's existing infrastructure and facilities, and then expanding several of those facilities. So at a high level, the capital improvement program outlines projects that exceed $250,000 and, again, are mainly construction of new facilities, renovations, major repairs that are comprehensive and non-routine. And there's a little over $127 million in current and proposed projects that are outlined in the capital improvements program in front of you, 51 million of which are current investments that are under construction or otherwise committed. And just above $24 million in 2024 investments. There are several projects that we'd like to highlight that were added to the CIP that is in front of you from the version that had been approved last year, and that is the addition of a proposed vehicle covered storage facility at Iron Horse Golf Course. That's in the amount of $800,000 estimated. And as Mark had indicated, we anticipate a developer requesting a benefit district related to Regents Park development later this year. We also have added a project to bury overhead lines at Iron Horse Golf and Mission, where Evergy is proposing some new overhead lines. We also added pickleball courts at City Park with a combination of the city's federal ARPA funds. Those were the recovery funds that were provided by the city from the pandemic, as well as parks funding, and pickleball courts are a high priority set by the governing body. We also included in 2026 Fire Station number 4 from the Public Safety Fund. So those are things that we thought were important to highlight.
Ms. Stoddard?
Yes.
Can I ask you a question on Regions Park? Can you go into a little bit more detail? Can you remind me where that development is? And
I'm going to ask David, would you be willing, or Mark, would you be willing to jump in on that?
Regents Park, you had 135 that was at the southwest corner of 135th Street and Kenneth. Just to the south of that, 137th Street is being constructed as part of that project, and it'll be on the south side. And then there will also be a townhome portion that you actually just, I believe, saw with 59 units, just kind of located in the northwest corner of that. So right around 135th Street and Kenneth Road, or High Drive.
so is the benefit district for roads, or specifically what?
David?
Get everyone in on this.
David Lay, Public Works Director, and the benefit district is to construct High Drive from 135th down to 137th.
Okay.
So the developer paid for the 137th Street project from Chadwick over to Kenneth on his own, but he's looking for a little assistance on the High Drive portion.
Okay, so that money is going to go towards roads then?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a question on the burying overhead lines at the Iron Horse Golf Course in Mission. Are the lines that Evergy is proposing one and the same as the ones we want to bury, or are we proposing to bury some because of improvements that are being made by Evergy on a different section?
So Evergy is proposing to install another set of power lines diagonal across the golf course, and then when they get out to Mission at right around 153rd, they plan on adding another set of lines north to 151st. And so they've offered, it's going to cost them right around $2.5 million to do the overhead, and they said they could do underground for $5 million, so they offered to split that cost with us. So they would be burying the proposed lines along the golf course, and then when they get out to Mission from 153rd to 151st, they would bury all the power lines that are along the roadway.
Do we know how many miles that is of buried line?
To bury the lines?
How many miles of line it is?
How many miles of line are we talking about?
It's probably a little over half a mile.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman,
Yes, Commissioner McGurran.
just to piggyback on the conversation about the buried lines, how does this impact the lines that were put along Mission Road and then across 151st Street that were added, I'm guessing 4 or 5 years ago? If I remember correctly, Kansas City Power and Light at the time needed to add those lines to provide additional electricity support to the Water One facility on Knoll. And I'm curious if any of this impacts the lines that I'm referencing.
So the lines along 151st between Mission and Knoll, as was mentioned, they were installed by Evergy right around 5 or 6 years ago, and it was really, at the time, they told us it was to provide additional power, a second source for the Water One pump tank over there at 143rd and Knoll. And so those lines will be unaffected by this project. This is south of 151st Street along Mission Road, just for 2 blocks along Mission Road.
And my recollection of the situation 5 or 6 years ago was that the city came to an agreement with Evergy today, Kansas City Power and Light then, that when the 151st Street was widened, they would carry the cost to bury those lines.
Yeah, that would be something that we do have an agreement with them, and so we would work through that agreement when we do 151st Street, the reconstruction of that arterial.
So the good news here is that what is about to happen potentially going forward with the additional lines that they want to install is going to have no negative influence on the lines that are already along 151st or along Mission Road and would not impact the city's current agreement.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McGurran. Commissioner Block.
One more, Fire Station 4, that's new, right? Because there are only 3 right now, and where would that go? I guess this is the first I've heard of a 4th fire station.
Chief Fitzgerald, would you like to answer that? Thank you.
Welcome, Chief.
Good evening, Colin Fitzgerald, Fire Chief. Yes, there are currently 3 fire stations. Station 1 is the one that's being rebuilt. It's just replacing the existing Station 1, which was constructed in like late 40s. So Station 4 would be the 4th station, and the proposed location is just to our east on the corner of, northeast corner of Rowe and Town Center Drive. That's city-owned land.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that I
No,
missed?
I don't know that I'd heard that before.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And there's a sheet in the very back of your packet that details the projects that were either delayed or had to be placed in the unfunded category. A couple of stormwater projects were recommended for delay, and you can see that that sheet is kind of broken into the top portion being those that are delayed and the other projects that remain unfunded. The residential street reconstruction projects have been delayed in 2025 and 2027. A number of projects which were previously included in the 2023-2027 CIP have been moved to the unfunded list due to us trying to manage the city's debt and the mill levy requirements for the bond and interest fund. Example is Mission Road, 143rd to 151st. And funding of any of the projects that are on that unfunded list would require either new resources or a delay or unfunding another project or a combination of those. And the reasons for that have to do with this next slide. So when we were putting together the capital improvement program, our initial review of the capital improvement program before we switched a number of these projects to unfunded, it required a significant increase in the mill levy in several years. So the proposed capital improvements program includes a combination of new debt and spending down some significant reserves in the Economic Development Fund related to electric utility undergrounding projects that we'll summarize for you here in a moment. And that resulted in smoothing out of the mill levy that was required in several years. So we think, again, we're trying to look comprehensively at what's happening in the next several years. The city's taken on quite a bit of debt with new projects over the last few years, and that debt will then become due in terms of payments, requiring these resources in the bond and interest fund in several years.
Ms. Stoddard, and again, this is a little bit outside our swim lane, but just for informational purposes, what is the current mill levy, and what I understand you're flattening it, but is it still, do you anticipate that it will rise just at a slower rate?
Hold on just a second. Let me grab my other sheet here. The current mill levy in 2023 in that fund is 4.152 mills. And with the projections that we came up with and smoothing it out, as I had mentioned, we should have a high point of a mill levy based on projections in 2027 of 6.842 mills. Again, these are things that are looked at annually as we're looking at the capital improvements program. So we're really looking at the next budget year. So for this year, we're looking at 2024 in terms of what the mill levy will be set for that year. But we like to do these projections just so that we have a really good understanding of what's going to be required in future years, again, especially given the amount of debt that we've incurred with some pretty large projects.
We appreciate your work on that. That's good to be looking forward to, like, in that manner.
And the next thing I just wanted to highlight for you, and there's a nice summary page for you in your packet on this, is undergrounding of power lines. So as you know, the city has had a commitment to underground power lines that goes back a number of years. And we just wanted to highlight this, and also because the previous comment that I made about us shifting some of the funding related to undergrounding these facilities, we're looking at tapping the city's economic development fund instead of a debt sourcing some of these big projects. We've committed a little over $11 million to undergrounding power line projects currently under construction or completed since 2017. So it's been a large commitment. It's had a great impact, but it's a large commitment. Also, $3.7 million in undergrounding is included in the 123rd Street project from Mission to State Line, currently under design. And $8.4 million in undergrounding is associated with 4 recommended projects. 1 project is currently funded in 2024, and 3 arterial projects are unfunded. And about a little over $21 million in undergrounding is associated with 6 projects recommended for delay. And again, there's a nice chart that I would draw your attention to related to that entire issue. So the next steps for you is this evening's work session and an opportunity for you all to ask any other questions that you might have. The May 23rd meeting, you'll have your Planning Commission consideration again, making a finding whether the capital improvement program is in conformance with the comprehensive plan. And in a bit of a departure from past practice, we recommended to the governing body that rather than approving the capital improvements program in June ahead of kind of starting the budget process, that we really put them both in tandem with one another. So the public hearing of the capital improvement program with the governing body approval of the 2024 budget we're proposing comes together in one hearing in August. And that does enable the opportunity for some flexibility for the governing body as we get into the operating budget, if there's any need to relook at the capital improvement program for any reason. And again, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner, please.
I have an interest in the utility industry, having been in that, so I'd like to ask a question on the undergrounding. Does the city of Leawood have a system of how to prioritize what gets undergrounded and what doesn't? I'm asking because in work that I have seen in utilities and been experiencing, different parts of the country have different reasons. And also, lots of times people think undergrounding is just always a 100% solution to things like reliability. But like anything else, it kind of depends on the time and the place and also what's going on. So I'd be curious about any priorities to improve reliability, update because of age, change appearance, and things such as that that the city uses.
So this is David Lay, Public Works Director. On that, in 2017, the governing body directed staff to start undergrounding power lines, even on streets we were just milling and overlaying. They wanted to get the overhead utilities underground, so it was more of a directive from the governing body and not with Evergy. And so we had started that process, as mentioned, and we spent over $11 million over the past 5 years. Some of the things that we're running into is Evergy is struggling to get their utilities, their cabinets on order. It takes them 18 months, and so it's pushing our projects back, our street projects that are associated with these. And so it's Evergy's cost has gone up, which is now that they've delayed our projects, our street projects are going up in cost. So it's really kind of this domino effect. And so that's why staff has now requested that we go back to more what we were doing prior to 2017, and that is just underground the utilities when we have maybe 25 to 50% conflict with Evergy, because Evergy will pay for a portion of that if they have to relocate. And so, on a mill and overlay project, they don't have any conflicts, and so all that cost is borne by the city. So we're just trying to delay that work.
And I'd like to mention, I'd say, I am right in tune with what you're saying. We're only in competition with 98% of the rest of the country on updating power systems. And things such as transformers are in very short demand. And there are going to be some real ugly surprises potentially on costs, I think. So I appreciate those kinds of thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Carlberg. Other questions for staff? Yes, Commissioner Coleman.
This question is for Ms. Claxton. Just curious, where are the pickleball courts going to be? Where are you guys putting them at City Park?
We have two potential locations. One would be west of the baseball fields. However, the city doesn't own that property, so we would have to have a conversation with Johnson County Wastewater. There was an interlocal agreement done, if you know where I'm talking about, where they did all of their staging there, where the parking lot was, back in the early 80s, so it's been a while. The other location potentially could be next to the tennis courts on that east side. Both of those locations, of course, would have parking, which would be a benefit to the project in terms of location, also cost.
Okay. Do you plan to have those lit as well, or not?
We do,
Okay, good.
yes.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. Commissioner Block.
And then on the unfunded projects, there are still dates in here on this. Are these, I assume, subject to change because some of them still have like 2024 on them?
Yeah, we left the dates on there just so everyone was aware of when they were originally scheduled last year. So you could reference back if you wanted to know when they were originally scheduled to be built.
And then I guess best guess as to how much delayed they would be, or can you not do that at this time?
That'd be hard to do. It's going to be beyond 2029. Some of the projects, such as the Mission Road, that's a $20 million project. So that's going to be a major hit to the bond just because of the cost of the project. So something like that, we would really have to look at trying to find some other funding to help us out on that.
Yeah, and I guess those are the ones that I'm most interested in because I'm just in that part of the city, is 151st and Mission.
So we'll, in the meantime, we'll have to be doing some work to Mission Road just to make sure it gets by. So we may be doing a mill and overlay or looking at the intersection of 151st and Mission to see if there's other things we can do to that intersection to increase capacity.
And then the residential projects that were delayed, was that the 3 million every other year that was with the 3 million on the sewer or the stormwater?
Correct. It was 3 million for residential recon. Then the next year it was 3 million on the metal pipe. And so on the residential recons on those streets, we'll look at them and see if we need to do a mill and overlay with our residential program. And then we do also have funds from the 1/8 cent storm sewer. So if we do have some metal pipe issues, we still have some funds available that we can address those problems.
And so have those residential rebuilds, have those been, are those one of the dates that aren't certain or when it got delayed?
Yeah, so far there's 2 residential street recons that have been delayed. They've been just pushed back to beyond 2029. So the hope is that once we get to 2029, we can start the program back every other year.
Okay, thank you.
David, before you step back, just kind of a follow-up on that and maybe go up to a 25,000-foot level or whatnot. I know that we've paid a lot of attention over the last few years to stormwater management and wastewater, well, stormwater management. Can you give us a little sense for where you think we are, and are we making the progress we need to make? Are we having to sacrifice some of that progress because of these financial concerns? What are your thoughts?
So we started in, I think 2017, we had 103,000 feet of pipe right around that metal pipe. And so currently we have around 92,000. So we have completed around almost 2 miles of of pipe replacement from metal to concrete. So some of the things that Brian has done is gone out to the county to get additional funding to help us with our projects. So we typically are receiving around $700,000 every year from the county to do these maintenance projects. So that's really helped out. That was never planned initially. So I think missing out on 1 year may not be a big issue, but yeah, we are going to have to get back on that coming in 2029.
And are the big concerns replacing the metal pipe, or do we have stormwater issues where we need some additional infrastructure regardless of what shape the pipe's in right now?
Yeah, we have both, and we also have concrete pipe that's 1940, 1960 vintage, so we're getting a lot of that older pipe. It's shorter segments, so there's a lot of joints that are starting to separate. Pipes are undersized, so yeah, we'll have a stormwater project going. We'll need to have that continuing forward.
And this may be apples and oranges, so help me with this a little bit, but are we in a situation where stormwater management and power undergrounding are in competition with each other for funds, or are they apples and oranges?
Stormwater is a main priority. So the governing body mentioned that at the work session, that the first thing that they would move off would be the power lines to get back on schedule for the stormwater and other items.
Because like you said, you've done 2 miles of stormwater work, but I couldn't do the percentages in my head very quickly, but we've still got a long ways to go on that.
Yes, we do.
All right, great, thank you. Other questions for Mr. Lay while he's up there? Looks like no worries, David. Yes,
I
Diane?
was just going to add that in relation to the question that was posed to David about the unfunded projects, I would say that while the projects that are on that sheet are beyond 2029 at this point, that there is always an opportunity to relook at the capital improvements program every year. So there might be an opportunity to put them back in, again, kind of depending on what a priority is at the time. And also, as David mentioned, I mean, if there's a significant funding opportunity that comes our way and we're able to get federal funds or something like that, that would be reason to move a project up. Those kinds of things are flexibility that's within the plan every year to sort of look at.
Ms. Stoddard, another question. One of the things that Lee was very proud of, and with good reason, I think, is the commitment to public art. And we kind of have a separate line item and a separate program for public art, which I think is good. It keeps our focus on it. And I understand from the chairman of the Arts Commission that they voted, I think, last night to recommend against any additional assessments on new developments and whatnot for the art fee. Can you give us your thoughts about this capital improvements program and how it deals with the arts? Are the arts still in their kind of rightful place, or are they having to take a backseat a little bit because of these financing issues?
Thank you for the question, and I may have Ms. Claxton add to my answer, but I think generally that is included in here, as it has been, and has been an important priority for the city to invest in the art program, and we have wonderful assets, and we want to be able to take care of them and add to them over time. Do you have anything else to add?
Chris, are you comfortable where we're at with public art?
I think the way that the Arts Council has moved forward in the last 5 or 6 years, recognizing that it's not feasible to do a piece of public art every year, one, has been helpful. The other thing, if you recall, that we did increase the per citizen amount from $5 to $7, which that'll be collected during this year and put into that fund at the beginning of 2024, is also very helpful, because that's an additional $68,000, which doesn't sound like much, but when you add the additional to what we're getting, that's also very helpful. And we look at that, the CIP for art, just like we do the other CIP every year, and sometimes things change. But I think they're on track to maintain the level of installations that they've been doing in the past, and they've done a good job.
Great, thanks. Well, I guess the other question I have, and I should know the answer to this, and I apologize for not, but obviously there is a maintenance cost that goes along with our artwork. Is that baked in when you decide on a particular project, or how do we fund the ongoing maintenance of this artwork?
Yeah, per the policy, it is baked in, and we've been very fortunate not to have to make a lot of repairs. One of the major repairs we did have to make was up at the Wendell Castle bench at Brook Beatty several years ago when the sycamore tree fell on it. We have a $25,000 deductible, but the repair was significant and the piece had to be removed. So we've had some minor things, but we've never had anything really substantial where we had to replace a piece or a significant cost in repairing a piece. Certain things like painting a piece, we've had to do that a couple times. Loopy, down at the entrance to the park, Run Red Run, over by Shelters A and B, those have recently been painted. So there is a mechanism there to take care of that.
And for instance, in those examples you gave, were those paid for out of just your operating budget, or is there some sort of a reserve fund created that can be tapped when there's a need?
It depends. A lot of times those type of expenses are low enough to where they'll come out of, like the painting might have come out of, in fact, I think it did come out of the public art impact fee, because we're not collecting as much money there. And again, if it's $5,000 or $7,000, that's a good place to spend that money rather than go into a capital account or affect the operating budget.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Block.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Block.
One other question, and Chris, this isn't for you, but just on the outside funds, county, state, federal, how often, I mean, it takes a CARES Act or a Recovery Act, kind of I don't know, I can't remember which those federal acts were. I mean, does it take something major, or does that money, that $700,000 or whatever that was referenced from the county periodically, are those anomalies, or those, you know, does the city count on those? Are they eligible for those?
So the county, for stormwater, has, I believe it's $20 million a year. I can't remember the exact amount, but they have a tax, a Johnson County tax, that they help pay for some of the, whether it's flood control or a maintenance project or a stormwater treatment project. They'll help fund that. So you have to submit the project. It works its way through a watershed group, which then goes to the Stormwater Management Committee and then goes to the County Board of Commissioners. But those are available annually. And then every other year, there's some federal funds that are offered up through Mid-America Regional Council for roadway projects or congestion mitigation funding, which we did receive on that too. It's a couple years out, but so we do have these annual availability for these fundings to go after.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner McGurran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question that goes back to the mill levy. I'd like to just get a feeling for what I think you probably all know that we may not have heard yet. And I'll round this, but the potential 4.2 mill levy increasing to potentially 6.8 at its kind of high water mark at some point in the future. Can you give us kind of an impact to the average Leawood homeowner?
I would have to do some math to give you that, which we can do, but you'd need to give me a second.
Take your time.
No one
If
wants to.
If you can add that in later tonight, that'd be great.
We may need to follow up on that maybe between now and your next meeting to give you an idea of that. And again, that is, you know, that is in the debt service fund. The other major mill levy fund that comprises then what ends up being the entire mill levy is the general fund, which supports most of the general operations of the city. But we'll follow up on that information for you between now and the next meeting.
Thank you.
And Ms. Stoddard, it might be helpful, and you've probably already thought of this, but to just give us a sense of scale of how much of the total mill levy is debt service versus our operations would be helpful.
Yes, and I don't. Let's see.
And we don't need that tonight. I was just.
We'll follow up with that too. Yeah.
It gives us some helpful context, I think.
Will do. Thank you.
Other questions for the staff?
Well, maybe just on that, then where does sales tax come in? What does the sales tax do if that's only, does that?
The sales tax is also an extremely important revenue source for the city, and in general, the general sales tax is coming into the general fund, and then we have some other special sales taxes that are allocated for special purposes. But all of those have, you know, a very important role in supporting the budget as well. The property tax mill levy does get a lot of attention, however.
Because it funds the capital projects more so?
No, it has a really important role in the general fund also, but, you know, people directly see that with their property tax bills, so there's always a lot of interest in where the mill levy is set, since it has such a direct impact on, you know, depending on what your home value is, and you're seeing that bill regularly, maybe a little bit differently than you see sales tax.
And does the city adjust the sales tax periodically to help with things like this, or not? Or you're saying it just goes to the general budget, not the capital improvements?
Cities do have the opportunity to adjust those slightly for certain circumstances, but it requires, most of the time, a vote of the people to implement a new sales tax for certain purposes, or if we have any ability to continue to do that within our general allocation. And I'm so new to the city, I don't know the answer to that. But typically, sales taxes don't change radically. Sometimes the revenue derived from them does, depending on, you know, the economic conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions this evening? Well, Mark, would you like to summarize or kind of bring us in for a landing here?
I think if you want to just kind of, you indicated some questions, and staff will get back to you with regard to that. And again, we have the meeting on May 23rd, so we'll try and get those answers to you.
I guess the other unfair question I always ask in this context is, what questions would you all have expected us to ask that we're not asking? What are we missing here?
That we'd be expecting you to, I think some of the questions that you asked are very good. I mean, basically looking as far as the needs of the city, the development of the city. As you know, the city administrator indicated, we're kind of surrounded, so we aren't growing as far as annexing and things like that. A lot of times you get into certain situations where, you know, are the facilities then being approved and extending in the right areas to encourage growth in those different areas as far as infrastructure. This is more as far as you see projects come to you on a monthly basis, and so you're actually seeing the growth that's taking place, and a lot of it has been along the 135th Street corridor, it seems like, for this last year. And so I think the questions that you've asked are good with regard to how they do fit in with the comprehensive plan.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks to the staff. We appreciate all the work you've done on this. So, yes, Ms. Knight.
Marcy Knight Legal, did you want the statute in the record?
Yeah,
I think in the
you've got
past, we have submitted a memo with your information, and I don't think it got in there this year. The statute is KSA 12-748. And we can provide that when you come back on the 23rd.
Okay.
But it refers to, it kind of talks about the comprehensive plan, and then and when you review and adopt a comprehensive plan, it says no public improvement, public facility, or public utility of a type embraced within the recommendations of the comp plan shall be constructed without first being submitted to and approved by the Planning Commission as being in conformity with the plan. And then there's another subsection below that talks about capital improvement programs, and it says whenever the Planning Commission has reviewed a capital improvement program and found that a specific public improvement, public facility, or public utility of a type embraced within the recommendations of the comprehensive plan is in conformity with such plan, no further approval by the Planning Commission is necessary under this section. So that's where that language comes from, to find that it's in conformity with the plan.
And this helps us avoid having to, on a case-by-case basis, every time that David wants to do something with the streets, having to bring it before us in a case format, right?
Correct.
Basically, put it all into one basket and approve it.
Correct.
Which is great for efficiency, but a little bit challenging as we look to discharge our obligations there.
Right, right.
Well, thank you again, I appreciate it. I guess it's time to talk about roofs.
Yes, we'll do a little bit of a review on the roofs, and then we did collect a number of samples for you to see if you'd like to see those as well.
Excellent, thank you. And while Mark's setting us up here, and this may be a vain hope, but I would ask the commissioners to hang on to their capital improvement program packets, and perhaps, Mark, we can avoid duplicating them and sending them out in advance of the 23rd. If for some reason somebody loses one, let us know. We'll get Mark to get you one, but we may be able to save at least one tree that way.
Yeah, I think that's great. Okay, just to review a little bit with regard to the roofs. Tonight's work session is a continuation of the work session that we had on the April 11th Planning Commission work session. And really the question is, as far as whether the city wants to consider a Leawood Development Ordinance Amendment that would allow laminated composite shingles, which are the asphalt shingles, on multifamily housing. Currently, right now, they are allowed on single family, and I would say the vast majority of single family houses out there have the laminated composite shingles. They are also allowed as far as on townhomes, as defined in the development ordinance, and a townhome is defined as a structure that has 2 or more units that are attached that also have individual utilities running to each one of those units. And they basically do not have another unit over on top of them or one over the other. So a lot of times, as far as like a row house or something like that, would be something that you would see where they would be allowed. And they were approved as far as on Leawood Village. They had the townhomes that were located on the north and also the west side of their main building with the apartments. And they did also have laminated composite shingles. There's generally 2 different types of laminated composite shingles, or actually there's 3. One is 3-tab. It's a single layer, and it's something that Leawood really doesn't meet our standards, so it's not allowed within the city of Leawood. We also have architectural laminated composite shingles, which are heavier. They also have better performance. They also provide certain details that try and make them look like they have more depth. And those are, again, are what you see on the vast majority. With regard to the other cities, all the ones that we looked at allow the architectural shingles on multifamily buildings. And there are a couple of them that are located within the city of Leawood as well. The Milano Apartments has architectural shingles on it right now. And then also, as far as the apartments are located south of 135th Street on the east side of Kenneth Road, also have laminated composite shingles on them. Both of those are architectural shingles. The other one is a designer shingle. Designer shingles tend to be heavier in weight, and they try and imitate a lot of times a shadow line by their thickness, or in the case of some of them, they have like a black layer that is underneath and creates a very prominent shadow line that's located there. I do want to make sure that as far as with regard to the performance, the architectural shingles are very good as far as performance. We've talked to a number of the reps from the different manufacturers, as well as some roofers who put these on, and they do have a high standard. They pretty much now all have a lifetime warranty is what they advertise. It used to be a 40-year warranty or a 50-year warranty. But now it seems like when we're talking to the representatives, they actually classify it as a lifetime warranty. And then we noticed that there are some portions of the warranty that may run out before certain others. For instance, with regard to algae resistance might be something that would end after 20 years or 30 or 40 years or something to that effect.
Mark, sorry to interrupt you, but I always puzzle a little bit when we talk about a lifetime warranty. Who or what's lifetime are we talking about? Are we talking about the building's life, the roof's life, the person who owns the building's life? Does the warranty transfer over to new owners?
I don't believe that they're allowed to be transferred over to new owners. I think it's the original owners, at least when we're talking to them. And lifetime We've kind of struggled with that too, because you think lifetime is lifetime of the whole building, and therefore I have a roof for life, and obviously that isn't the case. They do tend to be ones that last probably the 40, 50 years they can last. It was really kind of hard to nail down as far as the different manufacturers with regard to how that is implemented. We asked as far as the designer shingles, do they have a lifetime warranty that's greater than the architectural shingles? And the answer that we received was that only if they pay for it to be a certain builder who's certified to install, and there's an upcharge to that. But in general, the designer shingles and the architectural shingles have the same cost. With regard to how we got here at this point, as you all recall, East Village came before the Planning Commission and the governing body. They showed, as far as on their final plans, they had flat roofs that were shown. There was I think a lot of people would prefer as far as the pitched roofs. And so staff went to the developer, indicated that if we would take this through, would they be willing to go ahead and look as far as changing those to a pitched roof? So the developer was willing to do that. He offered to do that, and which is kind of the reason why we're here before you tonight. And then this would go on to the governing body as well. But it was staff that kind of initiated that, because thinking that the architecture would match more closely with what I think the majority of the people wanted.
So, Mark, question: you've done a great job of summarizing the different types of laminated laminated composite shingles. Current state, how do you describe the shingles or the roofing material that's required for multifamily housing units right now?
Multifamily housing units typically will see either concrete tile. Concrete tile is a roofing material that is much, much heavier. And so in general, and Commissioner Stevens probably has a great deal of expertise with this, would require, due to the weight, that the structure itself be beefed up. So there's an extra cost with regard to the making the structure able to support that weight. In addition, they can be broken pretty easily as you walk across them. We did talk to a roofer about that, and he kind of indicated that he thought that was because they don't cure them a real long time as far as at the manufacturers, and that they get put on, and then they tend to break a little bit easier. So you have to know what you're doing as far as replacement of those. They are heavier, so they use their weight to stay on the roof. It's still possible, though, as far as strong winds, it's still possible to have a concrete tile blow off. Another type of roof is a synthetic slate or a synthetic shake. And basically what that is, it's some sort of polymer, some kind of plastic polymer, where they actually pour it in the mold of a shake or a piece of slate. And that then goes on the roof. They tend to be much lighter. They also tend to be a lot more expensive. The roofers that we talked to actually had some concerns with regard to the synthetics. They said, the UV light really can affect them. We've had some experience with that with some of the ones that have been proved on some developments and then ended up that they no longer are constructed. There was class action lawsuits and that kind of thing. So the one that we see most now is Lamerite. Not Lamerite. Da Vinci is the manufacturer that we see for the most part now. And it seems like it's a fairly good product. We haven't noticed as far as the amount of UV fading that we've had with some of the others. So that's another option. Still another option is stone-coated steel. Stone-coated steel is it's a metal panel that's pressed into look like either a shake or a piece of slate, and they come in long strips. And basically, on top of that metal, they coat them with a stone coating or granules. So similar to as far as the laminated asphalt shingles, where they have like that stone coating that goes on top of the asphalt, These have that stone coating on top of the metal itself, and those are much lighter. They go on a lattice system where they put it on the roof. They do have the depth. I think it's a matter of preference as far as whether you how good you think they look. There's currently one that's located on fire station number 2. Has stone-coated steel that's located on it right now. I think we talked a little bit with regard to the fire. The fire department indicated that they can fight fires on any of the roofs that we have approved, but they are very comfortable as far as on the laminated composite shingles for the fact that, you know, you have a fire underneath, it will melt that material, and it'll be pretty easy to find the fire, whereas a stone-coated steel, it hits that metal and it has to travel until it can find a seam to get out. And then once they can find out where it is, they'll have to do a saw cut through the roof in order to reach the fire. So some of them it can take a little bit more, but again, the fire department wanted to emphasize the fact that they could fight any fire of any of these materials.
So Mark, my sense is that staff, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like staff is recommending the permission or permitting the laminated composite shingles. So this may be an unfair question, but make the case for us as to why the roofing material for multifamily ought to be different than any of the other dwellings that we have or buildings that we have in Leawood.
I think the reason why it's always been different is because basically we considered as far as, especially apartment buildings, the ones that were up to 12 units, to be kind of more of the mass and scale that you'd have of a commercial property. And so we required as far as the same types of roofing material to go on the multifamily because again, they tend to be larger. And they have more of that scale that is associated with that. There's a lot more roof that you're going to see on those buildings than you are as far as on a typical single family. Now, hopefully you're breaking up the roof a little bit, but a single family can break up the roof pretty well as far as going across. So that was the reason for it. As far as, I think it would be a big change, and I think it's something that the Planning Commission should take very seriously as far as whether they would support this or not. From staff's point of view, I think that the performance is there as far as both the architectural shingle and the designer shingle. I don't think that in talking with the building department, it's not going to have really any kind of effect as far as on the performance part of it. With regard to a lot of the architecture that we're seeing now, it tends to be more of the flat roofs. And you may have noticed that even in Overland Park or all around. It's just the kind of the style that they're going with. And what we've heard is that, you know, in order to do a pitched roof, if you're going to put concrete tile, then you're going to have to beef up the roof, and then the concrete tile itself is more expensive, and then it makes where the project doesn't pencil out. By allowing a laminated composite shingle on, you might allow as far as more architectural features. We might see a little bit more of that just because they'll actually take that into consideration as opposed to just coming in with a flat roof. Now the flat roof has some benefits as well, especially as far as with solar. I think that, you know, that's definitely a plus side for the flat roofs.
Commissioner Guyette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, you mentioned that there were a couple complexes that in Leawood that are existing that have those on them. What was the mechanism for them to achieve that? Did the developer request the variance on that, or how were they able to get that?
Essentially, it was on the one that was south of 135th Street on the east side of Kenneth Road. It was an older apartment complex, and at the time that it was constructed, it was allowed to have the laminated composite shingles. They did come back as far as to re-roof that. At that time, we told them that it was no longer permitted to have the laminated composite shingles. I think the issue that they're running into is that it hadn't been constructed to support heavier weights or anything, and so the city did come in and did a Leawood Development Ordinance Amendment, but structured in such a way that I think you had to be approved on a final plan prior to 2010. So it essentially was very tight, and that would have been the only one that would have met that requirement. With regard to the Milano apartments, There was a lawsuit with regard to the Milano Apartments, and there was some mediation that went through. And as part of that mediation, the stipulation stated that they had to have concrete tile on the clubhouse and also on the twin villas, but the apartment buildings themselves were allowed to have the laminated composite shingles Class 4, which I think is what the developer is wanting to do on the pitched roofs here.
Got it. And just one more follow-up question to that. Is this something that is requested frequently? Are we seeing it more and more to be requested to use this material?
We have been, on some of the projects that have come through, with, for instance, Leawood Village is one of the ones, because they had the townhomes that were going in, and originally we were really pushing as far as for the concrete tile on those,
Right.
but the development ordinance did allow it. It's kind of interesting, you have a building that can be fairly large with a townhouse, because townhouse is defined as 2 or more dwelling units. So it can actually have some mass as well, and that is allowed within the city of Leawood to have the laminated composite shingles. However, if you get a apartment building that, where you don't have the individual services going to each of the units, and then, or you have part of the structure over on top of another one, then they would not.
Mr.
Chairman.
Any thought, Mark, you have a lot of samples here in front of us as to, as we consider this, that, it should maybe only be architectural, should only be designer, would you go that far potentially to limit it to one or the other, or both?
I think that that's something that the Planning Commission can definitely take a look at. We talked with different roofers. We talked with manufacturers as well. They both will do a good job as far as the performance, but as far as the aesthetics, that's where it might be a little bit different. One roofer that we talked to indicated that Augusta has laminated composite shingles on their roof, and they figured if it was good enough for them, then it's pretty much good enough for the different projects they're working on in other cities. And when we asked him as far as what that one was, it was the Grand Manor Certainty, so it was more of a designer shingle. But I think if you look at a lot of almost every single apartment that we've been able to find in this area, it's actually been the architectural shingle.
But a designer, though, would more mimic, because they're typically thicker, just by themselves, without the dark sand or rock around them to create the depth, that there actually are deeper, the depth of the butt end is deeper to more mimic a slate or
Some of it, they do it in different ways. For instance, Certainty Presidential, which I think we have here.
So those are just thick without the additional black around them to make them look like. And are there others? I mean, I guess if we went down this path, I mean, I guess I wouldn't probably want to, only approve one type of, one manufacturer.
So is this Camelot that you're showing us now, is that an architectural or a design? They seem thinner, but.
These are both considered designer shingles, and they do it in different ways. For instance, the Presidential tends to be a little bit heavier, and you notice that. This one, really the thickness of it is about the same as what an architectural shingle is. It's just that they have this black shadow line kind of at the bottom on this one, and then on some of them, they'll stack another piece of laminated over it to make it thicker, but they don't do it on every single one. So this one doesn't have it, this one doesn't have it, but this one do.
Commissioner McGurran?
This may just be a suggestion. It may be something you have in your packet further down, but when it comes to the staff's knowledge base that it's gained over time and become experts on in this field, is it fair to suggest that maybe we look at a grid of some sort
that talks about the key requirements that the city has, or the key priorities that the city has. And then maybe on the other axis, either references what's on this screen, the type of housing, or maybe it references something else, but it would give us a visual that would enable us to sort of see, what might be good or bad or better than the other, or anything like that?
I think getting into too much as far as individual products would be very difficult. And the city has always done it more by standards. So currently, right now, we do allow laminated composition shingles, and the requirements are it has to be have a minimum of 5 color granules on it. So those little pieces of rock that are on there, there needs to be at least 5 different shades of that rock. The reason for that is so they won't look flat and monotone. Another thing is they have to have a minimum thickness at the butt end of the shingle of 3/16 of an inch. And the reason for that is, again, just to have at least a little bit of definition from the product itself. They also are required to have a shadow line, and the shadow line is that dark band that's located at the top of some of the shingles, and so that makes it look like it has more depth to it. So they are required to have that. And then the ones that are class 4, or actually I think all of them, they have to be a minimum of 200 pounds per square. And the square is 10 feet by 10 feet, so it's 100 square feet, so that actually goes to the weight of it.
But didn't you say that a lot of the manufacturers are moving away from even having a specification that talks about weight per square?
You're absolutely right. And weight used to be one of our major ways of regulating, and then it got to the point to where we had to start calling them, and then it got to the point where they wouldn't tell us even when we called them. Now, CertainTeed is the one company out there that we can actually go to the website, and they'll list as far as the pounds per square. So as far as Class 4 impact rating, which is a kind of the highest rating you can get as far as with regard to trying to be more hail resistant, and a lot of the insurance companies offer discounts as far as providing that. They tend to be lighter because the asphalt that is in them is mixed with a SBS material, is what they call it. It's a modified asphalt that actually is a little bit more resistant and can bounce back, has a little bit more elasticity to it when a hail hits it. So I was thinking as far as probably if the city was willing to go in the direction as far as allowing these, I would think that you would want to at least require that they be Class 4 impact rated shingles, that they have that performance standard to it. And then you would also want, as far as those other architectural standards that we require with regard to the color granules and the thickness of the butt end and the shadow line.
Mark, you have up on the screen in front of us, and I assume it's in front of the commissioners that are on the phone as well, essentially, I think 6 different categories of dwellings. Just for context's sake, is it only the last category that currently does not permit laminated composite shingles?
I'm not sure if somebody's not picking up, maybe, are they trying to?
No, it looks like everybody on the screen is paying attention. So
Oh, okay.
I think they're in.
Okay. Honestly, yeah, the single family, they're allowed to have them. The townhomes, as they're defined here, are allowed to have them. Single family attached, really, if it got into a design and one happened to go over the other one, then that would disqualify it from having them. But for the most part, it's the multifamily dwellings.
And the explanation for that goes back to this idea of massing, that typically multifamily dwellings have greater mass than any of the other 5 categories.
Correct.
I'm sorry, yes, Commissioner Guyette.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The standards that you just laid out are applicable to all of them except for the multifamily, that they are allowed.
Correct. The multifamily
So the
would not be
standards will
as
be
currently
the
right now.
same for the townhomes as they would be for the single family if you were to use the laminated composite.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Commissioner Coleman.
Mark, I'm trying to kind of get a timeline in my head of when the laminated shingles were outlawed, if you will.
I think it happened with this ordinance that we currently have, which was December of 2002. I think they were allowed before that, which is the reason why we saw the one that was south of 135th Street on the east side of Kenneth Road, constructed that way.
Okay, so prior to December 2002, they were allowed. After December 2002, they were outlawed by the LDO.
And actually, let me rephrase that, because they didn't have the same kind of wording and structure that they have now. They were not prohibited, so they were allowed to come before the Planning Commission as in governing body and make that request. And actually, I think at that time,
So
for
I'm-
final plans, they may have only gone to the Planning Commission.
Because I'm referencing the work session handout that you did for the April 11th work session.
Okay.
And you had an LDO previous asphalt shingle requirements. And I didn't see on here when they were non-approved products. So it kind of ends in 2000. That was my reasoning for asking when were
Sure.
they prohibited? Because like you said, there was no mention of it. It was silent in terms of that kind of material. And then in December 2002, it just on multifamily.
Correct.
Okay. Do you recall I don't know if anyone even was around back then, but the discussion of why they didn't want that? And I know you kind of alluded to that earlier.
And I was actually around, and I remember being part of, as far as the Leawood Development Ordinance at that time. I don't remember specific conversations with regard to the roofing, but I think it was kind of more or less with regard to the massing of it. And it was considered kind of more like a commercial as opposed than a residential. Things have kind of, they change over time. So it used to be at one point you had primarily wood shingles. They were on Leawood. And so from my understanding, this is before I was here, but the city was reluctant to go to laminated composite shingles, but basically because of the fire hazards, they did allow them in. But at that point, then they were really trying to make sure that they looked as much as possible, at least, like the wood shake, so Leawood could keep that kind of aesthetic that Leawood was known for. And of course, over the time I've been here, it seems like that's changed a little bit. Now the majority of the houses have laminated composite shingles, and colors that used to be not desired at all, because it used to be the only one that was allowed was weathered wood. Now you have other colors that have gotten in there as well.
Okay, so in the city of Leawood right now, how many apartment complexes have a laminated shingle?
I only know of 2 apartment complexes, and then the townhomes that are located at Leawood Village.
Okay, so the Leawood multifamily at State Line is one of them?
Correct.
Okay. I'm looking at your example again.
Yeah.
I'm referencing the April 11th work session
Sure.
photos. So Villa Milano has them, Leawood multifamily at State Line, and what was the other one?
The other one were the townhomes that were approved on the north and west side of Leawood Village, which is the one that's at State Line up across from Ward Parkway, which
Okay.
is the mixed-use development.
Okay. And then in terms of the other cities in the area, we are the only ones currently that prohibit this material on multifamily?
Staff contacted the other cities surrounding here, and we weren't able to find any that did not allow the architectural shingles. And then I also drove around this general area. I didn't go metro-wide, but I drove around this general area.
Okay, so when we talk about architectural, I want to make sure I'm getting this jargon correct.
Oh, sure, sure.
So the architectural shingles are the same as the laminated shingles, is that correct?
Yeah, they're just
we're
a
just kind of
style. You have
mixing-
the parent laminated composition shingles, and then you have architectural shingles, and you have designer shingles. And really, the only difference between those is kind of a lot of times the weight, and then also as far as the look of them.
Okay, but basically they're all in the same
They're all the same
family?
parent family. Yeah.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chairman. I guess related to some of this most recent discussion, and then you happen to pull up this slide, but you were going over the requirements of the laminate composite shingles, and then the discussion of they're approved everywhere except the apartments. And so is it, this excerpt here is from the LDO, I guess, on what's approved for everything
Except,
single family. Is the laminate composite shingle description the same for single family? Is that-
this is generally the same
Just
as
the
what it
same,
is here.
yeah.
It's just that portion under H where it basically says that it's not allowed unless it was approved on a final plan before September 1st, 2010.
Right.
Which is how the one that was south of 135th Street and east of Kenneth was re-roofed.
So as part of this, if we would want to approve for the multifamily, which I assume is the RP4, this would remain as it's stated and just eliminate the part about RP4 wouldn't require a special.
I would, it doesn't have to. If you wanted to, if the Planning Commission and governing body wanted to allow laminated composite shingles on multifamily, you would have the ability then to say, okay, for instance, currently right now, they don't have to be Class 4 impact rated. The Planning Commission and governing body could say, well, if they're used on multifamily, they do. We have a number of variety of colors that you can use out there for the single-family homes. The Planning Commission and governing body might say, you know what, no, it's going to be limited to something that looks more in the earth tones or like a shake or something to that, or maybe a slate. But I think you do have the ability to tailor it if that is the direction you would like to go.
Commissioner Guyette.
Okay,
Thank you. So just so I understand what that exchange just was, so we don't have to adopt the existing standards as they are written. We could say we want greater standards if they are allowed to be used on multifamily.
I think you could form it in the way that you would want, yes.
Commissioner Block?
And in doing that, could you specify that they have to be designer shingles? I mean, how would you do that? I mean, is that just up to the individual manufacturers to what they call designer? You know, I think you mentioned weights, but that might not be consistent among, between manufacturers. I mean, how would you see, if we took that approach of it can only be a designer shingle on these buildings, could you define that, do you think? Or, maybe you can't do it tonight, but do you see a way to do that?
I need to check out a little bit further. That is the term that pretty much all the manufacturers are using. I would probably want to feel more comfortable as far as the exact definition. So if it was codified in a certain way, it would be meant to do that it would do what you were intending to do.
Well, I'm curious to hear the thinking of the commission at this point in time. And well, I'll weigh in at the end as to what I'm thinking. Any comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Belzer.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm not there in person and wanting to see those shingle samples live and in person would have been great tonight. But my feeling is that multiple family, large scale buildings should be treated differently. We want different elevations in some of our new projects so that they don't all look the same. A lot of what's been coming across our table as far as the 135th corridor is all flat roofs. It all has a very much the same aesthetic. And here we have an opportunity to make it palatable for some of our builders to be able to create some interest and some difference. And but I think we should treat it differently. And allowing the laminated composite shingles seems to be reasonable, but requiring it to be a designer shingle would allow us to give them the leeway to use the shingles, but give us more of a I don't like the word control. I don't know what the right word is, but have a better say in the aesthetic and what it looks like. So it doesn't just look like a single family home. And I think my issue with it is some of these buildings that we're referring to are rather large scale. And if the intent is to have the larger scale buildings treated more like commercial buildings, and there's a specific look that we're going for in commercial buildings, that I think that requiring the designer shingles makes sense. And it seems to me to be a pretty good compromise on everybody's part.
Thank you, Commissioner Belzer. Other thoughts, Commissioner Guyed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I'm quite understanding the difference between architectural and the designer, and why one would be more beneficial over the other. I know we've been throwing around both of those terms, but in order to kind of say we want a specific type and determining the standards that would describe that particular label that we'd put on it, I don't think I'm quite understanding why one is more, or one is better than the other.
In performance-wise, at least from what I'm understanding, is they're both, performance-wise, they're both good.
But you have different aesthetics that are
You
attributed
have
to
different
both of them,
aesthetics,
right?
and then you have designer shingles on single-family houses as well. I mean, there's a lot of houses out there that used to, there probably still is. Grand Manor is something that we see on a regular basis. Presidential was another designer shingle that we would see on quite a few of them.
Okay.
But
So there are very nice-looking architectural ones, and there are very nice-looking designer ones, and we can't really say we only want one type, but we can say we want a standard that can
a standard that would
attribute a certain aesthetic.
correct, and we'd probably have to do a little bit more as far as to define that. Currently, right now, with the single-family houses, there's an approved roofing list. So if somebody wants a roofing material that isn't allowed as far as laminated composite shingle, and it's not on the list, then they have to make an application to us. Then we go through and make sure that it has an ICC-ES report, that it has the 5 color granules, that it meets all the different standards, and if it does, then that gets added onto the list. So that gets pretty specific to each of the shingles. It may be possible to do something like that with these as well, but I'd want to look into it a little bit more.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stevens, you're our design professional. I'm really curious to get your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of, I guess I'm hearing the concern that, some of the aesthetic differences, a manufacturer's designer line might have a different pattern like you've shown, like a stair-stepping pattern. They might offer different color options, and that's why they're called a designer line or something. But they're both, as you just described, they're both relatively the same, and so it kind of comes down to I guess the current standard. You are giving developers the option to do laminated composite shingles on multifamily, but it's subject to approval with a development planner coming through
And actually, currently, that's not the way it is. That would be something that would.
What's proposed?
Yeah,
language?
that basically what is being proposed is that you'd be allowed to use the laminated composite shingles. They still come to the Planning Commission, City Council, so you still see that. It's just that when you see it, they'll have the ability to have the laminated composite shingles on there instead of before they even make it to you, staff telling them, no, I'm sorry, that's not allowed. You have to go with something else.
Okay, I see. Your slide here says it's the current requirements, but I think what you're saying is this would be proposed if we included the.
However you wanted to tailor it as far as allowing.
These are the ones that were allowed
Oh,
before
I'm sorry,
2010.
before 2010, yeah. Okay. Well, that process might still be a good way to provide this option, you know, especially if other members of the Planning Commission want to have the ability to kind of approve the types of roofing on these larger commercial-like structures, to where that maybe they would have to propose, well, we're proposing this development plan with laminated composite shingles, but we're using the designer style and the higher quality shingle and all, and that's part of the approval, for those cases.
And
I mean, that might be an option to leave that in there versus just adopting it fully, I guess, for multifamily.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Block?
I think Commissioner Belzer said it maybe the best so far of kind of how I've been thinking about it, which is, I don't know the right words, quality, or I guess I see the designer line as being the most attractive. Again, not technical or, a defined term, I don't know what the right word is, but just the best of this type of product would potentially be the designer line. So I guess that's where I'm kind of drawn to that being, the requirement potentially for these. And maybe it's just as easy as a list that's kept on file of, and Mark, to what you were saying earlier, that, if a new one comes out, instead of having to try to capture all those in language like you have here, with weight and size and colors and all that kind of stuff, just list those that are considered designer today, and if a new one comes out, then, staff can review or whatever to update that list. But again, I guess not knowing all of the designer shingles out there, but some of the more common ones, I personally think they look better than just a traditional laminated. I understand they're one and the same, but they're just a little bit nicer looking, in my view, than just a standard laminated shingle.
Commissioner McGurran, I think your hand's been up for a while. Sorry about that. Thoughts? You're on mute, Steve. You're still on mute. There you go.
My mistake, sorry.
No worries.
Sorry. Okay, I agree with the statements that have been made by the three previous commissioners. I think opening up the door is okay, doing it in a way that we all feel comfortable with, but at the same time, we have some flexibility in the future that enables us to assure that, as things change, as things shift, we're able to, at least in a majority way, I guess, feel as though we've influenced it appropriately or approved it appropriately. I struggle a little bit with the fact that there are probably 200 different components to all of this. It's almost like there could be a huge flow chart that exists. That's why I was asking if there was any kind of a grid that could be put together that would really highlight what is most important to the city, and show it in a way that it didn't go by vendor, but it went by what we felt most comfortable with. And I think what we're all talking about is where we're landing in that regard already. So I'm fine. I'm a little bit overwhelmed, I guess, by the documentation, having not seen it before. So I think I'm okay with where everybody else is also.
Commissioner Guyette, I think you had a comment?
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I saw your hand. Commissioner Carlsberg, we've not heard from you tonight.
I like the idea of reserving the option for us to be able to make some decisions and not being very stringent, not stringent, but ultra constrictive on the roofs, because I'm not sure we could always say one particular colors of grains or anything is going to be not stylish in the future or a good option for something that has a certain design. So I'd prefer to say we have a certain standard and that we want to hear about that in the approval process so we could make a final decision as the years go on.
Thank you. I have to admit, I'm pretty ambivalent about this. At one point in time, I obviously made the point with Mark that out of all the various types of dwelling units, the only ones that don't permit it are the multifamily ones. But then if you look at it from the other side, which is really where I'm kind of landing right now, it strikes me as somewhat arbitrary if you take a building of a particular mass and you can have one kind of roof if you've got people living in it, but you can't have that kind of roof if you've got people working, offices, commercial, whatever the case may be. I mean, the distinction that the prior commission apparently saw between the size of buildings and the mass of building, the more I've thought about that, the more sense that makes to me. And as I say, it seems to me, and I've kind of done a 180 on this, because I kind of came in thinking that it didn't make sense to arbitrarily say you can't have a laminated roof, but we're just kind of moving the line now. So if we go down this path, we'll say, if I understand this correctly, Mark, and tell me if I'm thinking wrongly, that if it's a multifamily residential unit, you could have a laminated roof, and it may be the fancy kind of laminated roof or whatever the case may be. But if you're building Town Center Plaza, can't have a laminated roof on there. And that seems odd to me. It seems like there is some wisdom to the idea of a building having a certain mass being required to, regardless of what use it's put to, having the same sort of standards for roofing. And that's what I'm struggling with now, and I'm anxious to hear what other commissioners think about that particular question. Mark?
And I'm sorry, I have a correction. As I was trying to remember through it, Commissioner Coleman kind of was going down through the history, and I was thinking back to that re-roof of the one that was located south of 135th Street, east of Kenneth Road. And now I do remember everybody understood that they weren't allowed on multifamily at that point, but I think the ordinance was written in a way that it sounded like it would be or could be. And so we clarified that at that point. We did tailor this, so that part was right. But I think when we were going through the language and everything, we wanted to tighten it up at that time, at the time that this amendment was.
And those dates were still correct? You said December?
Yeah, September 1st, 2010 was this amendment, and then December 2002 was the current development ordinance when it first went into effect.
But we're still left with a situation where the use that a particular mass of building is put to
Absolutely.
becomes the distinguishing factor as to what kind of roof it has. And I'm not sure I'm convinced that there's a nexus there between the use and what kind of roof should go on.
And your point is, yes, right, that's very valid. One of the things that I also thought is that maybe staff could do is if we provided the planning commission addresses where these different ones, both the architectural and the designer shingles were located at, and you could look. Sometimes it takes looking on a bigger mass. For instance, the presidential, it does have a very stair-step pattern as it goes through, and I know a lot of people really don't like it when they see it. Other people do. It's on a lot of houses, but that way you could actually see, and you'd also see as far as sometimes if you get a certain distance away, you aren't really going to be able to tell the difference until you get up a little bit closer to them.
Yeah, and that's, to go on that, I'm looking at the photos that you included in the April 11th, and the Leawood multifamily state line, which is an example of a laminated composite. I mean, it looks kind of cheap, looks kind of basic. You compare it to like the Tomahawk Creek condominiums with the concrete tile roof, that looks a lot better, and some of these other options. So that's why I'm curious in the discussion back when they prohibited was it based on, it must have been based on looks. I mean, if the material can be on houses or anything, I'm assuming it was the aesthetic part where you just didn't want this sea of laminated composite shingles that looks like the Leawood multifamily at State Line across acres and acres of rooftops. That's my assumption. So I'd like to dig a little bit more into it and look at your examples. If you can give us real life examples, like, to go around and, not that we would have a field trip and rent the bus or anything, but on our own to go around and maybe look at it firsthand to try to compare what the laminated shingles look like versus something else. And then the architectural, the different variances of the laminated
Sure.
shingles would be
Yeah,
very
yeah,
helpful to me.
we would do both architectural and designer. We could even give you as far as some of the other roofing materials that we talked about that are allowed.
Commissioner Guyette.
I kind of like the thought of a potential trade-off for allowing these is that we would get more variation and more interesting roof lines, like you described earlier. Instead of the flat roofs of that project, we're now getting pitched roofs. So I kind of like that idea that we would be able to get more interesting roof lines in exchange for allowing these laminated composite shingles. So that's just a thought.
Other comments? Well, Mark, we appreciate all the work that you and the staff have put into this, and again, appreciate the various examples we have here. I'm sure you have those up in your office, so perhaps if Stacy or Steve or Scott happen to be around City Hall sometime, I'm sure you would be happy to
Absolutely.
to entertain them and have them take a look at these. And I like the idea of getting perhaps a list of, where we can see which of these different kinds of shingles or roofing materials are used. That would be very helpful. Any other thoughts on roofing tonight? Starting to feel a little bit like signs to me, but.
It's amazing how many times I've talked about roofing and signs in the time I've been here.
Exactly.
Well, I might
Yes,
just
Mr.
add,
Stevens.
because we've been kind of going around it, and, you've done a really good job setting maybe it's like you're describing a performance, but it's a specification guideline on the type of roof that would be provided, and it really narrows the field because it's the best qualities of all these kinds of roofs. But then to go further and kind of, each manufacturer, the 5 you have here, or the ones that you've researched, they have their own designer line. Maybe they don't even call it designer, but it's another special line, and the architectural line, and though I just don't know how unless you would, somebody, I think you mentioned about highlighting approved manufacturers' products, but they're gonna change, and, others will come up, and, I guess that goes back to the idea of saying we'd only approve the designer line. Well, that's, I don't know how you can really define that
And
within the type of.
And I'll have to take a little bit more look at this. But again, I do want to make sure that you understand, you would still be seeing these in the plans that come before you. And so as part of that, they'd have to provide material samples. We could also require that they provide us with a list of a couple of addresses where they've been on, as well as provide us photos of different buildings where they've been used in a similar use as what they're proposing. So I don't want you to think that, you don't have another kind of bite at the apple. You'll be seeing these individually as if they were allowed, you'd be seeing them with the individual project, just like you see as far as whether it's brick or stucco or stone, or what the shades are and what the colors are, and those kind of things. So I still think the planning commission and the governing body has a little bit of, they still have a little bit of control.
All right. Mark, other business to come before us this evening?
I think that's it.
Commissioner Coleman.
If I can just, if we're done with the roofing, by the way, this has made me an incredible expert on roofing now, since I knew absolutely nothing beforehand. At least I know something, so when I need to re-roof, I have a baseline here. One of the things that you sent out to us was the city council's having a work session of their own on the 135th Street Community Plan. To be honest, I was a little surprised by that. I think at least that came out of the blue for me. I had no idea that that was even kind of in their radar, on their radar upcoming. Can you give us a little bit of context on how they got to that point to bring up that discussion, and what are they trying to do with it?
I think it was originally brought up by by Councilmember Kane was the one who indicated, and I think several of the other governing body members also indicated that they would want that as well. I think they want to relook as far as what we are currently allowing within the 135th Street corridor by looking at the 135th Street Community Plan as part of that, and to see if the governing body and the Planning Commission feel like there needs to be a change to those standards. Currently, right now, I think probably the impetus to it was, East Village came in, and to be fair, East Village was a very large project. It was the largest project by far that the city of Leawood has had, and so it did have quite of an impact. And and this body and the governing body considered it in a lot of different areas, and so I think they just want to, now that that's kind of gone through, they want to kind of retune. They know that there are a couple of key areas out there still within the 135th Street corridor, but by far and away, the majority of it is already either has a plan on it or is starting to be constructed. So,
Mark, I'd remind you of the conversation that we had that, the map that we've recently seen shows, the vast majority of 135th Street corridor is currently under approved plans, but from our experience, we know that, who knows, maybe half or a third of those will actually put a spade in the ground. And so I think it's important for the council to realize that they're really not just dealing with the dribs and drabs of what's left, but there's the potential somewhere out there for a number of these spaces to be open again. So as I said, I'm not sure how realistic this is, but my thought was that as you build that map out for their planning session to put the termination dates of the currently approved plans, I think a lot of them are way out there, but they will at least be illustrative that we might be looking in 2025 or 2026, and all of a sudden, we have a whole bunch of open space and we're starting over again on 135th Street. My sense is, as you said, that a fair amount of it is an artifact of the public's input into East Village, and an acknowledgement that perhaps that there's a good reason to take another look at the 135th Street plan. But I think by the same token, and again, we're being included for observation purposes, which I really appreciate the city council doing, but it's always important to emphasize to the public that comprehensive plans and 135th Street corridor plan is not an ironclad, it's got to fall within that. It's aspirational in nature, and that was something that in my observation of watching the proceedings both here and at the council got lost at certain times and was lost on some of the public members, is that if it wasn't exactly within the four corners of the comprehensive plan, then that meant we shouldn't do it. And again, it's a loose blueprint. It's not an ordinance. But again, I continue to hope that perhaps we'll have a chance maybe down the road to maybe have an interaction with the city council, a joint work session after they've had their work session. Now, it's up to them, and we'll see if they're interested in having us have some input as well.
Well, and, you know, I'm glad the city council is doing it, because I know for years we've been asking that we need to revisit this. I can't tell you how many years, but I can remember on multiple developments that we have seen, we've asked for that. We've asked for the city council to reopen this. We've tried to reopen it. I remember staff saying, well, the city council's the one that really needs to get this ball rolling. So I'm glad that is occurring. But as you mentioned, Mark, we would like a seat at the table to discuss it with them. I think we have a lot of people that have been on here for a number of years, that have been through a lot of 135th proposals, good and bad. Some have gone forth, some have not. But I think the Planning Commission definitely wants a seat at that table when we are discussing that. So I'm glad they're going forth and getting the ball rolling.
And that's very possible that will happen. I think this is kind of the start. And if I may, as far as Chair Elkins made an excellent point with regard to things being planned but not being constructed, because back before 2008, it looked like 135th Street corridor was going to be built out within basically 5 years. We had so many plans that went down on these pieces of property, and some of the ones that are available now actually had plans on them. It's just that they've long expired since. And then you have stuff like Aventino, where, you know, it was actually Bellagio, and how long did Bellagio sit there? It got partially built out, and even though it was partially built out, you know, somebody came in with a new plan, and so that changed it. So that is an excellent point, and we have added those dates to the map.
Great, thank you, appreciate that.
Well, so
Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, you know, we had prior workshop meetings about maybe considering the reduction of heights there, and then maybe refocusing, you know, stronger mixed-use developments to nodes within major intersections or properties within the 135th plan. So did any of that go forward, or could that be part of?
I think
what
that's
this
some
is,
of
this
what they may
discussion is?
want to discuss.
Yeah, I think that's part of what's on their
Yeah,
agenda.
okay, I see.
All right, Commissioner Coleman.
One further item, Ms. Geist is getting married on Saturday.
How?
So congratulations to you. And will you still be a Miss Geist, or we have to call you something different next meeting?
I'll be changing my last name.
Okay, don't tell us. We want to be
I'll keep it a
surprised.
surprise for now.
Okay.
But yeah,
We'll wait for 2 weeks.
sounds good.
Congratulations.
I would also like to mention, as far as I think Debbie sent out an email with regard to the Mark Luncheon coming up, and I believe it is June 9th, that's coming up as well.
Mark, I forget what Debbie said the deadline was for us to get back with her.
Let me get with Debbie, and then we'll send out an email.
Okay.
It was May 23rd, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Well, if there's nothing else, we will stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody, for a great meeting tonight.